In part 1 of our Plague Tale series, we covered the events of Innocence. Here in part 2, we will now tackle the sequel, Requiem. If Innocence was the precursor to the de Rune siblings' exposure to the horrors of their world and what it meant to fend for themselves against overwhelming odds, A Plague Tale Requiem expands upon that nightmare and the established. Released in October 2022, it took everything from the original and built on it in meaningful ways. But the situation that Amicia and Hugo find themselves in is on an entirely different level. Once dreaming of becoming a knight, Amicia has slotted into the role of a protector for her younger brother, except she's learning the hard way that there's no room for nobility in the mud here. It's kill or be killed, and she's only gotten better at it. Hugo is still at odds with the Macula in his blood, even if he doesn't realize it, but there's an air about him, almost a sort of sad acceptance that he won't ever be normal, coupled with a fire to change this. A Requiem honors the dead, and unfortunately the siblings will understand what that means in more ways than one. A Plague Tale Requiem picks up 6 months after Innocence, after the death of Vitalis, as the Inquisition fell by the wayside. The telltale rats, who signal devastation, have seemingly gone silent, the whispers no longer dogging Hugo at every turn, but that doesn't mean the siblings are safe. Together with their friend Lucas, who's since become an apprentice for their mother Beatrice, they traveled to Provence. It's devastated by the Black Death, with tens of thousands dead from the plague. The 100 Years' War is still ongoing, and as a result, cities like Marseille, the largest in the region, have erected massive walls. Far from wanting to get caught up in the brutality of it all, the group ventures to the Red City at the behest of the Order, which believes it can help Hugo. They are there to meet with Vaudin, a magister, and from the outset, things look good. Amicia and Hugo playfully run away from Lucas, their pretend villain struggling due to poor cardio, and even engage in some hide and seek. Soon enough, they encounter a young boy, Tonin, along the way, who seems amicable enough to their fantasies, but suddenly has to excuse himself. Things quickly take a turn when they happen upon the site of a slaughter and a masked axe-wielding beekeeper who accuses them of being thieves. They narrowly escape, only to happen upon the same boy being choked while his assailants accuse the siblings of thievery. Amicia kills one in self-defense, while Hugo is smacked aside. Just as it appears the Macula reawakens in Hugo, and we hear screaming off screen, he then falls unconscious. Suffice it to say that this is an omen of things to come. Now, in his dreams, he awakens on an island overseen by a phoenix, which he then follows. There's no sign of Amicia, Beatrice, or Lucas, and he eventually happens upon a tree surrounded by some water. As the Macula slowly takes hold, he crawls desperately, eventually touching the water and feeling better. The scenery clears up, and he asks the phoenix if he can return with someone. Cut back to the waking world, where Hugo regains consciousness on a wagon with Lucas, Amicia, and Beatrice. His sister claims that they were playing by the river and suddenly felt very tired, so she carried him back. Further up the road, they encounter a man who claims that a boy and girl trespassed on family property, resulting in the slaughter of his nephews. His ally removes a blanket in the back where Hugo is hiding, and Amicia is pulled off as the wagon rushes off. After sneaking past other assailants, she eventually catches up with the man who threatens to kill Beatrice. Amicia uses her sling to slay him before going to the unconscious Hugo, her hands trembling at what she's done. One title drop later and they arrive in the Red City. Once again, everything seems hunky-dory. They interact with the residents, hear about a festival held by the Count, and explore before finally settling into the house arranged by the Order. However, Hugo's condition suddenly takes a turn as signs of the Macula are clear as day. Beatrice stays to look after him as Amicia and Lucas seek out Vaudin, discovering dozens of victims of the plague and bypassing some mercenaries. They eventually end up in the sewers, encountering a bystander with a torch suddenly surrounded by the rats. Just when it seems he can escape, a tidal wave of vermin approaches, causing Amicia and Lucas to flee. As they navigate past the rats and eventually reach Vaudin's location, she expresses her guilt at telling Hugo that the worst was behind them. They soldier on and locate Vaudin, but before leaving, Amicia sees a mural of a curious island. Vaudin's arrival sees him out trying to treat Hugo, and the results aren't pretty. He soon begins to experience seizures, to which Amicia and Lucas seek out an herbalist for some nightshade to calm him. The city itself is a hostile place, with soldiers constantly on patrol. They eventually reach its outskirts, venturing into the forest to find the herbalist. Unfortunately, soldiers led by the Beast, who was left to oversee the Red City while the Count was away, arrived to scavenge supplies. Amicia isn't faring well, the months-long pressure and trauma settling in as she tries to calm herself down. Lucas sets off separately to find the Nightshade before the soldiers can take it. After calming herself, she hears the soldiers speaking about a looter. She eventually finds Lucas in the barn, taking out the soldier, interrogating him. The others hear the commotion and rush to investigate, but after overcoming her panic, Amicia responds in the only way she knows how, slaughtering everything in her path. It's only the arrival of the Beast that stops her, and the two are then thrown in jail. Thankfully, Lucas has a plan, creating a commotion that allows them to escape and make it back to the city. But despite giving the Nightshade to Vaudin, Hugo isn't getting any better. Amicia takes issue with his approach, remarking that the more pain Hugo feels, the more rats emerge. She protests Vaudin's suggestion to isolate Hugo in the Order's HQ in Marseille, but Beatrice reveals the shocking truth: the Macula is nearing the final threshold. When that happens, Hugo will die, and there's no telling how the plague rats will respond. The cure, created by Lucas in Innocence, only served to stop him from reaching the first threshold, but Vaudin describes this phenomenon as something else, and that there's no stopping it. Amicia brings up the island and the fresco of it in the Magister's laboratory, but he calls it a child's fantasy. Together with Lucas, Amicia sets out to find Joseph, who will bring the group to Marseille by boat. It's all they can do to navigate the ravaged harbor and Joseph, but before long, a familiar rumbling breaks out through the Red City. A rumbling that Provence as a whole has probably never had to deal with. Before long, the rats emerge by the hundreds of thousands, which is probably a good time to note that a Plague Tale Requiem can have 300,000 rats on screen at once. As they rampage through the streets, slaying everyone, Amicia hastens back to Hugo. She then attempts to calm him down, but Vaudin dies from a collapsed beam, his body consigned to the rats. Eventually, they return to Joseph to begin the journey to Marseille. Guilty for the destruction of the Red City, Hugo insists that they travel to the island from his dreams. While left alone with her, Amicia hashes it out with her about how confining him in Marseille will result in his death. But it's not long before a new obstacle presents itself, as Amicia works to clear a path for the boat. Before they can depart, she sees the wall, Arnaud Malpart, who chides her for slaying his men, and boy is she excellent at slaying even more. Joseph ends up dead in the encounter, and it's up to Amicia to free the boat using her new crossbow. Arnaud eventually catches up with her and knocks her out. Hugo is having none of it though, and summons the rats to attack Arnaud, who manages to run away. While the boat wrenches free, Beatrice is stunned when the siblings decide not to continue with her and Lucas. Instead, they opt to find a different way to help Hugo, one that hopefully doesn't result in his demise. Perhaps the island, which appears in his dreamscape, could be a clue. Maybe it really exists and is calling out to him for a reason. With Amicia bandaged up, the two set out to learn more, and eventually happen upon a camp. Unfortunately, they're forced to flee from Provence soldiers after Amicia re-injures her head. Hugo then uses the plague rats to fight back. She awakens in time to fight the Beast, but despite emerging victorious, Amicia has no strength left. Driven to protect his sister, Hugo eventually loses control over the plague rats, and they proceed to do what they do best: go on a tear, devouring everything and anything in sight. It looks like it's curtains for the siblings, and who else should show up to save them but Arnaud? Despite some reluctance, especially since he was trying to kill Amicia earlier, the siblings accept Arnaud's help. The fact that the Count's soldiers are also looking for him means they share a similar goal. Also, as it turns out, the island that they're searching for actually exists. It's called Lacuna, and Arnaud knows how to reach it. He eventually takes them to Sophia, a smuggler whom he spared once upon a time for a ride. That is, after dealing with an outbreak of rats and hostile soldiers. Sophia also agrees to the trip on one condition: hurt Amicia again and Arnaud is dead. Of course, the departure is far from easy, especially with the Count's soldiers mucking about. One of them captures Sophia, but Amicia saves her, and they manage to reunite with Hugo and Arnaud on the Rescasse. Thus, the journey begins to Lacuna, but unbeknownst to Amicia, Arnaud has his own plans for when they eventually arrive. Everything seems fine as the trio find Count Victor de Arles addressing the people. Suddenly, Arnaud asks Hugo to kill him. As it turns out, he blames the Count for the death of his son. The broken shield he carries around is symbolic of that memory, and he's plotted his revenge for years. What he didn't count on was Amicia getting in the way to stop him from using Hugo. Arnaud decides to go it alone as the Count recognizes him and attacks, commanding his troops to capture Amicia and Hugo in the meantime. While giving them the slip, Amicia decides to go back and stop Arnaud from causing any more trouble, knocking down a pole to stun him while the soldiers arrest him. While the Count is somewhat hostile, it's the arrival of his wife, the Countess Emilie de Arles, that calms things down. She welcomes Hugo with open arms, and as they venture to their palace, he spots a carving of the very same phoenix, which is confirmation that Lacuna is where they're meant to be. The next day they venture out to see more, having received new clothes, and come across Sophia, aware of Arnaud's arrest, but not too broken up about it. She's actually more relieved than Amicia has no allegiance to the Count, or any lord for that matter, especially with everything that's gone on thus far. Upon finding some phoenix statues which seem to point towards something, they eventually reveal a map of the island left behind by the Order. One of the other symbols appears to point towards the mountains, so naturally they venture forth, discovering a strange ceremony involving the Count and Countess. The trio get to know about someone who preceded Hugo. Named Basilius, he was taken in by the Order despite Aelia, his protector, decrying his cruel treatment. Amicia tells Sophia the truth about Hugo and how the Macula is slowly killing him. Meanwhile, Hugo seemingly discovers the same tree from his dream, but touching the surrounding water has no effect. He does feel a connection to Basilius and believes they could have been friends once upon a time. Unfortunately, he also learns that the phoenix actually represents the Order. Upon snooping around some more, they learn that Aelia was confined to a different part of the island in a fort. They travel to the forest and come across Milo, who rounds up slaves and sacrifices them in some insane plot to overthrow the Count. Hugo intervenes, summoning rats to kill the slavers, though Milo escapes, much to Sophia's horror. After locating Aelia's crypt, they learn about Basilius' location, and again bump heads with Milo, who returns with reinforcements. While Sophia slays him, Amicia and Hugo deal with the other slavers before they escape. Though aghast at the siblings' recklessness, Sophia declares her desire to stick around despite their shared death wish. They continue, eventually descending into a hidden location where Basilius was held, and find his body confined in chains. Aelia attempted to save him, fighting against overwhelming Order forces before finally succumbing to her wounds. Amicia believes that he succumbed to the Macula when Aelia failed, with Hugo noting how sad and angry he was. Thus began the plague, and to make matters worse, Hugo is traumatized by his predecessor's fate to the point that he also wants to kill everyone when he dies. Despite Amicia reassuring him that she'll provide a life without conflict, rats overwhelm the facility, leading to their escape. While Hugo seems calm for the moment, the trio are told by the soldiers upon returning that they have guests, Beatrice and Lucas. They rush to the palace, even as the rats run amok on the island, infecting several people. Reuniting with their mother, Amicia explains everything, including how the Order can find Basilius, and that Vaudin's treatment of Hugo is only because of how they utterly failed the first carrier. Amicia believes the Macula can remain dormant, thus ensuring Hugo's survival if they're able to settle down somewhere quiet. Beatrice agrees, wanting to retreat to their homes in the mountains on the mainland. However, Amicia is summoned by Victor, who attacks her. As a result, the Count moves to kill Amicia. She escapes and eventually discovers Beatrice tied to a pole as Emilie claims Hugo as her own. Badly wounded, Amicia attempts to fight Victor, but to no avail, and watches the Countess murder her mother. Hugo awakens and eventually arrives at the site, going berserk after seeing his mother dead. Spurred by Amicia, he summons rats to lay waste to the Count's troops, slaying Emilie in the process, though the ground crumbles and sends them underground. While Hugo is still alive, the Macula has pretty much taken him over. As they attempt to reach the harbor, they arrive at a massive nest, where they discover that the nebula is taking shape. Amicia can't get through to him as he proclaims that he's home, so she does what she does best, tells the nebula that he's coming with her. Cue thousands of rats, but the group escapes and Hugo slowly regains his senses. Approaching the harbor, they learn that Arnaud is alive and save him from execution. They meet up with Sophia and finally leave Lacuna as it falls apart from the rat infestation. Of course, the Count isn't willing to let bygones be bygones and gives chase on the seas. Despite the group battling the soldiers who board their ship, Amicia is pierced by an arrow and goes down. After failing to summon the rats, Hugo rushes Victor, only to be knocked out, and it's all that Arnaud can do to retrieve Amicia and leap into the sea while their ship is destroyed. Hugo is taken to Marseille, and much like Basilius, he gives in to despair at the thought of Amicia's death. The Macula fully consumes him, the nebula fully manifesting and unleashing an endless supply of plague rats. Meanwhile, the Count ventures to the wreckage of the Riscos to slay any survivors, but ends up fighting Amicia and Arnaud. Despite how they met and how he tried to use Hugo for revenge, the latter has actually come to care for the siblings. He puts his body on the line, creating an opportunity for Amicia to slay Victor, and as he dies, proclaims his appreciation for Hugo. Reuniting with Sophia and Lucas, Amicia ventures into Marseille to try and save her brother, but as the title of the next chapter reveals, the city has a new ruler, King Hugo, the prime at Macula's host. Despite the countless rats, the group believes that Hugo is somewhere in the nebula. Sophia ends up injured, and it's up to Amicia and Lucas to enter and try and find him. Various tests are in place to try and stop his sister, but she eventually follows the Phoenix statues, takes on hordes of rats in the shapes of people, and finds what she believes to be Hugo. Their happiness is tragically short-lived though, since he's now one with the Macula. There's nothing that he can do to stop this, but Amicia can, and she must enter the court to kill her brother. Amicia reunites with Lucas and finds Hugo's body attached to the nebula. Perhaps with what little remains of himself, he gives way for his sister, who uses her sling to kill him and end the threat of the Macula. It's ironic, the journey that began with Amicia using that very same sling to prove to her father that she was worthy to be a knight, helping her and her brother through countless ordeals, including her first kill to save him. But in effect, he's finally free from the nightmare. A year later, she's shown with Sophia getting ready to depart. The Macula is likely still out there, and rather than standing by, she wants to become the next carrier's protector. Before departing, she ventures to Hugo's grave, decorated by various flowers, a nod to all those times he would pick the same and place it in her sister's hair. A sign of more innocent times, as they were, even as they were surrounded by death and suffering. Leaving another flower, Amicia bids farewell to her brother and sets out, his Requiem complete. While her fate is left unknown, something else appears after the credits roll, a baby on a ventilator. A closer look reveals that the Macula courses through their body, a sign of their status as a carrier and a warning that the plague could return. But despite this ominous scene, the next entry in the series doesn't travel to a new era, or at least not the one we're expecting. Instead, Resonance: A Plague Tale Legacy follows Sophia 15 years before the first game's events. Before earning infamy as a smuggler, she ventures to the Minotaur's island, together with her friend Lenny, seemingly to find treasure. She seemingly discovers more than she bargained for, confronting her past in the process. How does this connect with the Prima Macula? Why is Sophia witnessing the memories of Theseus, the legendary Greek hero, and what does the mythical Minotaur have to do with any of this? We'll find out when Resonance launches on August 27th for Xbox Series X and S, PS5 and PC, but for now, the day belongs to the de Runes, Amicia and Hugo and their tragic fate. So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.